Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I'm sending my greeting in the afternoon of Manila, Philippines. And this is the one session in the Asia Clean Energy Forum. And this session is dedicated to ADB's energy policy that we are currently reviewing. I'm the moderator of this session. I'm Yong-Ping Chai, Chief of the Energy Sector Group at the Asian Development Bank. First of all, I would like to request my colleague and chair of Energy Committee at the Asian Development Bank, Mr. Priyantha Vijayatunga, to give welcome remarks. Mr. Priyantha, please.
Thank you. Yong-Ping. Dr. Yong-Ping Jai, the Chief of the Energy Sector Group, distinguished panelists, invitees, my colleagues from the energy community, both within and outside ADB, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning, afternoon, or evening to all of you, wherever you are connecting from. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this consultation roundtable with global experts. The objective of this roundtable is to hear insights from global experts when pursuing low carbon transition path in the Asia Pacific region's energy sector. Also to obtain feedback on the draft new energy policy of the Asian Development Bank. Over the past decades, the Asia Pacific region has witnessed a profound transformation in many areas. In 2020, the Asia Pacific region surpassed the GDP of the rest of the world combined. By 2030, the region is expected to contribute roughly about 60% of the global growth and will also be responsible for about 2.4 billion new members of the middle class entering the global economy. However, the region faces huge challenges in the energy sector. For instance, the total energy consumption has more than doubled since 2000 due to, among others, fast economic growth, of course. Then coal and fossil fuels play a large part of the energy supply in the region. Due to its heavy reliance on these fossil fuels, the region causes a disproportionate share of global greenhouse gas emissions. Developing countries in the region contribute to about 45% of the global GHG emissions from the energy sector, and this is likely to grow as the economies grow. Therefore, the decisions made in the region today will have a critical impact on the future global emissions pathway. Also, despite great strides in increasing access to electricity, energy poverty and inequality still prevails in the region. There are over 200 million people lacking access to electricity, and a much bigger number burn solid and unclean fuels for cooking and heating. At the same time, Asia Pacific region is more vulnerable to risks of climate change and natural hazards. However, the region is well positioned to address these risks and capture the opportunities that come from managing climate risk effectively. Keeping all these challenges and the issues in mind, ADB is now in the process of updating its energy policy. It will be fully aligned with ADB Strategy 2030, Sustainable Development Goals, and of course, the Paris Agreement. In this regard, ADB has conducted a series of consultation meetings with various stakeholders since June 2020 to make the new policy more relevant, effective, and inclusive. ADB also launched a website and posted the draft energy policy for public consultation. Holding this roundtable is part of this process, and we look forward to hearing your views and insight and suggestions in the journey towards low carbon energy transition and finalizing the new energy policy of ADB. We will follow carefully to today's discussions and consider all important points raised when finalizing the energy policy. I thank all the panelists, participants in advance for their engagement and insights during the roundtable. Thank you so much. Back to you, Yong-Ping. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Priyantha, for the welcoming remarks. I would like to invite at this point Mr. Sakari Paksanan, who is our consultant who worked with ADB on energy policy, and also he's very familiar with the MDB work, International organization as a former DDG of IRENA. Mr. Sakari, please, for scene setting.
Thank you very much, Chair, distinguished panelists and participants. In this presentation, I will first briefly describe what led ADB to the process of revising this 2009 energy policy. And I will then describe the 5 fundamental principles set out in the draft policy paper for the bank's energy sector operations. And last, I will present and elevate few provisions in the policy paper which have probably drawn the greatest attention in consultations after the draft policy was made public in early May. So, about the rationale of updating the energy policy, firstly, the energy landscape of the region's developing member countries significantly changed during the last decade. One of the most well-known changes has been, of course, the reduction in the cost of renewable energy, especially solar PV power and onshore wind. But we also today have available technologies that weren't there when the 2009 energy policy was under preparation. We talk about battery storage, hydrogen, power-to-X fuels, and electric mobility, which are not just ideas, but breaking through at the moment. And these new technologies, they incite new business models. And with the business models, we get the higher private sector participation in the sector, which again then calls for reforms and more complex regulatory frameworks. Secondly, already mentioned are the 2 major commitments to goals and targets under 2 global processes during the last decade. One is the Sustainable Development Goals, which is under the United Nations Blueprint for Sustainable Future, and the second is the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. Thirdly, ADB updated its vision and strategy for 2030, and it is the highest levels guidance of the bank. So the energy policy needs to align with that, and especially there is a set of 7 new operational priorities which have been followed carefully in the new draft. And on this basis, ADB's independent sector-wide evaluation and the management recognize that these 3 developments, the 2009 energy policy was not anymore adequately aligned with today's requirements and needed an update. The work that has been involving extensive consultations already so far with stakeholders and now has come to the stage where the draft policy is public for feedback since early last May. The policy is built on 5 principles which align with ADB's global commitments as well as the operational priorities. The first principle aims, in line with SDG 7, to accelerate ADB's efforts to bring affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy to all, a phrase that we have often heard. We also want to consider that the quality of services should be such that it enables use of energy productive uses and activities and creates associated employment and business opportunities in rural areas. Here we can see 2 major changes over the last 10 years. One is that the electrification process has reached a certain level of maturity already. The electrification rates are relatively high in the Asia and the Pacific region. The second one, setting focus for the next decade, is that the clean cooking agenda, the success has not been equally good, and the new policy needs to set some priority on that area. The second principle demonstrates the bank's alignment with the Paris Agreement. ADB will tackle climate change, enhance environmental sustainability, and build climate and disaster resilience. And there are 5 major instruments, so to say, or areas of operation to be noticed. Energy efficiency, we pick up the low-hanging fruits there, and it is the first in all projects and interventions that we need to consider. Second is to increase the renewable energy and consequently reduce the use of fossil fuels, especially coal, and we pursue the planned phase out of coal in the region through this policy. Fourth is promoting innovation in energy technologies. Some of them were mentioned already in the opening. And fifth, there is the resilience aspect. ADP will support resilience planning, assessment, and consequent investments in that area. And this brings especially the distribution sector to the front line, because that is the sector that is in the client interface, but also encounters many of the problems of, let's say, natural hazards, and is in charge to its clients for this performance in this front. The third principle recognizes that it is not only about financing infrastructure investments, but the central operational model of ADB is to engage with the developing member states institutions and help framing enabling energy policies. And these policies are today more and more linked to the objectives of the Paris Agreement and long-term planning and NDCs that are set mechanisms under the agreement. The fourth principle confirms that ADP continues promoting regional cooperation to enhance energy security and increase cross-border access to cleaner energy sources. Here again, the future will bring some new areas of focus. And one of them is that ADP will not only focus on hard infrastructure, transmission lines, and electricity trade and gas pipelines, but also regional cooperation in terms of knowledge sharing, financial cooperation, and for instance, like harmonizing energy efficiency standards. And the fifth principle highlights cross-sectoral operations to maximize development. And this is a response to ADP's call for ADP to be stronger, better, and faster in its service delivery. One of the examples of focuses in this area is the realization that the ADP has not always performed best in terms of managing programs which consist of small and widely dispersed projects. Such projects appear, for instance, in the areas of distributed energy or energy efficiency, and something will be done in particular in these areas. So some highlights on the policy updates which have come up in the consultations. But before that, I would like to highlight the role of long-term planning for low-carbon transition. This is an important area, and ADP seeks to work closely with its member states in planning, and also use the planning as a way of dialogue from which ADP can identify opportunities to work with the DMCs on investments. So ADP will support DMCs to develop long-term roadmaps and planning for low-carbon transition in the energy sector. And hopefully these plans are time-bound and concrete with matrices to be achieved. Three can be mentioned. One is decreasing the carbon intensity. The second is peaking of carbon emissions. And the third is achieving carbon neutrality. Also, ADP, the last item on this slide, is to pursue development of competition and private sector participation through market-based mechanisms. This has several purposes, but to mention two. This is to fill the huge financing gap of the energy transition. So the energy transition, as outlined previously and in many instances, cannot be financed by public funds alone. The private sector participation is indeed a must. Secondly, it has been shown that the private sector will bring new dynamism to the sector, and they are more quick and eager to adopt new and innovative business models and technologies in their operations in the sector. Going to some of the more discussed areas, one is fossil fuels. And the policy says that ADP will not finance any coal mining, oil and gas field exploration and drilling activities. ADP will also not finance any new coal-fired capacity for power and heat generation. ADP will support DMCs to develop strategic approaches and policies for a just transition that addresses socioeconomic impacts of transitioning away from fossil fuels. ADP may finance natural gas pipelines, gas to power projects, industrial and household use of gas projects, subject to some conditions for the projects. First of all, the project should preferably meet basic energy requirements, which of course implies that the low-income countries would be in the target group for this assistance. The project should be consistent with the country's long-term low-carbon transition plan and contribute to lower CO2 emissions compared to grid emission factor. And they should use high efficiency and best available technologies. And these projects should not directly or indirectly support activities which are not Paris aligned. And on this, the policy says that detailed guidance note will be issued to staff for processing natural gas projects. Few more points on the natural gas issue. So it is recognized that the natural gas can be used where it is consistent with country's own Paris-aligned long-term transition plan, considering its ability to reduce emissions as against the other fossil fuels like oil and gas. Also, natural gas has a major impact on heating and cooking. So lots of China's large cities and towns are heated and they get cooking heated for domestic purposes with gas. And the same process is now going on in India. And there is also a possibility to develop very highly efficient units using gas, applying cogeneration and trigeneration, combining power generation, heating and cooling, where efficiencies can reach 80–90%. And the better, of course, if a project can provide flexible power balancing, intermittency and variability of renewable energy supply. But the bank also recognizes the need to consider long-term impacts of these investments. And consequently, the project should be prepared for CCUS and hydrogen. Large hydropower, ADP will be highly selective in its support to large hydropower projects. This is for projects with seasonal storage reservoir with multi-purpose benefits, as well as including pumped storage plants. Here again, a detailed guidance note will be issued to staff for processing hydropower project proposals. Waste to energy has raised many comments in the feedback to the policy. ADP will support waste to energy investments as they provide an opportunity for integrated cross-sectoral projects. It's addressed many fields. They enhance the livability and health in cities and rural areas, prevent environmental hazards caused by landfills, and potentially provide employment to the poorest of the poor. But waste to energy projects are actually more waste management issue than power generation. The project's finance must follow the waste management order of priority, starting with the actions to minimize and eliminate waste generation, then consider options for recycling, followed by processing and using the waste for example, as construction material or composting for biogas or for combustion for energy, in waste to energy plants, and finally landfilling as the last option. This is also an issue where a detailed guidance note will be issued to staff for processing waste to energy projects. As to some other technologies and fuel uses, ADP may participate in financing projects with hybrid electricity solutions. This may involve fossil fuels together with renewable energy in the context of isolated grids in islands and remote areas. ADP will also support DMCs to be informed and participant in piloting new technologies such as battery storage, CCUS, green hydrogen, or ocean energy. ADP will support cross-sectoral technologies. Several examples exist, like electric vehicles and developing charging infrastructure, combining transport, city planning, and energy issues, solar pumps for irrigation and sanitation, and renewable energy for communities, for lighting, cooking, but also for health clinics and cold chain for vaccines. And last, ADP will continue its policy of not to be involved in financing investments in nuclear energy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Sakkari, for setting the scene for this discussion. And for this discussion, we have about, I think, 65, over an hour, a little bit, discussion on energy policy. We have invited, we had the honor to have 6 panelists with us today. I'll just give a very, very brief introduction, and before I calling them, I will call them for interventions. We have Ms. Maria Paskova from E3G. She's the Senior Policy Advisor, Energy Diplomacy and Sustainable Finance at E3G. We have Mr. Zulfikar Yuhnardi, Senior Officer, Sustainable Energy, Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Department of ASEAN Center for Energy. We have Mr. Toshiyuki Sakamoto, Managing Director, the Institute of Energy Economics, IEJ, Japan. We have Mr. Ashwini Kumar, former Managing Director, Solar Energy Corporation of India. We have Mr. Xavier Chen, President, Beijing Energy Club, China. And Mr. Hongpeng Liu, Director, Energy Division, United Nations, ESCAP. So we have 6 very distinguished panelists with us. I will proceed with this discussion in about 3 rounds. The first round, I will ask our panelists a question, a general question, whether you feel that the draft policy as presented by Mr. Sakkari, you feel this is broadly in the right direction? And if so, what are the reasons you like this? And if you feel that there's still major gaps in this draft policy, and please also tell us in which areas that we can actually fill the gap and further improve and revise this policy before it's finalized. So this will be generic common question for everyone. I will go for a second round of question. The second round will be more related to your own perspective, your background, your own experience and expertise. And from on that basis, what would be your specific suggestions to ADB to help our member countries better, more relevant, more efficient. And the third one, if we have time, we'll pick up a few questions from the audience. So I encourage our participant in the audience, online participants, to ask your question in the Q&A button and share your question. I will ask our colleagues to respond. In addition to the panelists, I must mention that you have seen Mr. Prianta, our chair of Energy Committee at ADB, and also Ms. Shannon. She's here, our staff, principal energy specialist here at the ADB. They will be also responding to your questions, depending your questions. So let me start with Mr. Hong Peng. If you're ready, the first generic question to you, and you still remember, I hope, I wanted to ask you whether you feel our draft policy is in the right direction, or there are some major gaps you want us to fill. Thank you. Hong Peng, please, first.
Thank you, Dr. Jai. And I think Sakari has a very comprehensive overview of the energy policy. It's very helpful. Compared to your energy policy 2009, this is really, I think, first, I just want to congratulate with this new energy policy. It's go along the line to address the 2030 agenda for sustainable development and also the Paris Agreement. I really think this is on the right direction, and it's very comprehensive, covered all the issues and the challenges, and also aligned well with the international agreement. And I can see from these 5 principles, it's covered almost well all the emerging issues and the challenges for energy sector we are facing currently in Asia Pacific. As you rightly said, in the Asia Pacific, we have the challenges for energy sector. One is how you just provide the energy access for those 200 million still without access to electricity. At the same time, I also see the emphasis on the clean cooking. That's probably the most difficult part. You know, when we did this annually together with the ADB from ESCAP side about the review of SDG 7 in Asian Pacific, we can see the energy access. Mostly we are on track, and we can reach universal access for the whole region by 2030 for energy access to electricity. But if we go along the current scenario, we can't reach this universal access for clean cooking. If we go along this line, there's about still over, I think, 10% of the population without access to clean cooking. Currently, the 40% of the population still without clean cooking fuels. So when we refer to clean cooking here, it's mainly the liquefied fuels and the electricity fuels for cooking. So most of those population, 40%, still use traditional biomass for cooking, or they use coal for cooking. So that is where I really think the big challenge, but not only for ADB, for the whole energy sector in Asia Pacific, for all the government should address these issues. If you look at the population without clean cooking, even the emerging economies in China, in India, Indonesia, there are a lot of such countries still facing these challenges. So I really think if ADB emphasized in the policy, still with this kind of direction and with the investment potential, that will help a lot to provide this guidance to the government and also to the private sector. And secondly, I think if you want to cover all the emerging issues, that could be also another area we need to think about the IT, technology development. So I see you have a cross-cutting.
Hong Kong, please. You're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes, yes.
So I really think this is new areas could be emphasized. The private sector already started. Those IT companies, the big IT companies, they already started the network for RE100. That means 100% of renewables for this new data center. So I really think maybe ADB should include this kind of areas into these policies and to provide this guidance for private sector. And I also see the phase out of coal. I really glad to see the stop financing new coal project from this energy policy. That is really on the right direction. I may have a chance for the second round to talk about more details on that line. Thank you.
Thank you, Hong Kong, for giving me comfort of saying that we are broadly in the right direction. Appreciate that. And you also mentioned the issue of cooking. And when I think about cooking, sometimes people are saying that this is a low tech and this is a basic need. But actually, this is a low tech and basic need are very, very difficult to accomplish. We have been struggling. I hope we can find new business models and new technologies to address that need for us to be going faster in meeting the universal access for cooking, maybe heating also in some countries. And you also mentioned IT. That is a very high-tech issue. Data centers are becoming emerging issues. I think we need to prepare our countries in energy efficiency and introducing renewable energy before these data centers are becoming a big issue. So great advice. I will prepare you for a very difficult second round and give you a chance to reflect as others to speak. The consultation I've been having so far, there are a number of people who are like you saying that you are doing a great thing, but also feedback that they don't agree with some of the fundamental suggestions there. So reaching a consensus through a differentiated approach among the countries. The United Nations, you are the expert in that. So I'd like to ask you, in consideration of perceived the differences of different opinions, how do we reconcile and how to reach a minimum common understanding so we can move forward? We don't want to stop at this level. We want to maintain the momentum. We want to actually make this draft policy into a final policy. So prepare yourself for that one next round. So with that, I would like to ask next panelist, Mr. Xavier Chen, president of Beijing Energy Club in China. He has a huge amount of experience in every areas, including IT area that Hong Kong just mentioned. But I will start with the first question, a generic question, whether, Xavier, you believe that we are more or less in the right direction first. Thank you. Xavier, please.
Yeah, thank you, Yongping, for the kind of invitation. Yes, the ADB energy policy review is very timely, in the right direction, and has major gaps. I would say that it's very timely because ADB, since its creation, has already 4 times energy policy review. It's about every 10 years. So last time policy announcement was 2009, so it's about right. You know, Beijing Energy Club had the opportunity to contribute to the review process because last year in October, we organized a consultation session to provide the ADB with the Chinese perspective. So last month, when I saw the drafted paper put forward for consultation, I downloaded it and read it carefully. I found it as an excellent paper, very comprehensive and very balanced, but still it's not perfect. So the gaps I see, there are 3 main gaps, and then I have also a few technical issues to raise. First gap is the context could be set clearer. This is an energy policy review. The key objective of energy policy is to meet the energy demand with highest reliability, highest efficiency, and lowest environmental footprint, including carbon. The biggest context of the ADB member countries, in particular developing member states, is the continuing energy demand growth. Mr. Pianda mentioned in his opening remark that energy demand doubled over last 20 years in the Asia Pacific. And this growth will continue. Mr. Hong Peng said, clean cooking is missing for many parts of rural areas. So energy demand growth is the fundamental context that I did not see much analysis in the draft policy paper. And the presentation I just heard by Mr. Sakari is also the context, the global nature, but not enough about the Asia Pacific ADB member states' specific conditions. So these specific conditions could be made better, clearer. Without setting this context, the energy policy review risks becoming a climate policy review only from energy perspective. So remember, this is an energy policy review, not just the climate policy review. Although climate is a very, very important element, the driving force of energy policy agenda today. So that's the first gap. Second, the 5 energy policy guiding principles are all very good, but I would say they lack vitality and dynamism. They look like too traditional, conformist, and all-time true. If you put these 5 principles 10 years ago, they would be still valid. I think the most vibrant feature of our time is innovation, including digital innovation, Hong Peng also mentioned, energy technology innovation, carbon innovation, business model innovation, policy innovation, and financing structural innovation. So ADB has done already something in this area through this high-tech technology innovation challenge and the ADB ventures. And also in his opening speech Monday, ADB president said innovation is the key. ADB will support and encourage innovations. So I see that in principle number 2, it mentioned the innovative technologies that ADB will encourage. But the innovation is not only on technology, it is cross-board. Innovation is so important that it should not only be a bullet point hidden in another principle. So I would strongly suggest that ADB aids a new energy policy principle called embracing innovation as perhaps principle number 3, to support innovative technologies, encourage institutional innovations for sector governance, to encourage business model innovation in ADB finance projects, and also to encourage financing structural innovation in ADB structured loans. So this is the second gap and a suggestion regarding additional principle of energy policy for ADB. The third is capacity building needs. The draft policy paper mentioned about long-term planning needs, but it did not stress anything on capacity building for developing member states. ADB in the past played a very important role in capacity building for its developing member states, has been equally important or even more important than the limited amount of capital to developing member countries. So capacity building is even more important than the money you provide. The draft policy paper did not elaborate how ADB is going to do anything in this capacity building sector. So I would suggest that ADB in the revision increases this part of content. So these are the three major gap I see and comments. Then others are a little bit technical, but they are important for the whole policy review. You know, on paragraph 17, it mentioned about strong and flexible grids, but it focuses too much on high voltage transmission lines. Whereas in the future, more and more renewables will be connected at the distribution level. Not enough focus on distribution. So I think this distribution sector strengthening, renovation, and capacity building and reform will be very, very important. Second, on paragraph 127, you know, it says development of ultra high voltage technology for both alternating and direct current electricity transmission, together with rapid cost decline in solar and wind power, have extended the quest for large-scale development of utilization hydro, wind, solar resources for inter-sub-regional context. So this reference to ultra-high voltage power transmission, particularly alternative current transmission for better use of renewables, is misleading. It did not have enough factual background to support it. Indeed, no country has proven the viability of this without the mixture of large-scale coal-fired power. The third one, paragraph 21, on emerging technologies. So this focuses a lot on hydrogen, but in reality, hydrogen, in particular green hydrogen, is not yet ready, technically and commercially, for market development. Not only in developed countries, even so in developing member states. So this section discussion should expand to a more wider range of emerging technologies. So that's the third technical detail comments. And then paragraph 87 on gas financing. I noticed that you have put a number of conditions and also the use and, meaning that all these conditions should be met so that ADB can continue to finance gas. But gas is not just a transition fuel, it's a company fuel for renewables. Mr. Hongpeng mentioned about the clean fuel, you know, for rural areas. And the gas is the main fuel to provide the rural cooking. So if you have to meet all these criteria for ADB to finance gas projects, how can large part of Asian developing countries still relying on natural gas to get the ADB financing? You know, and I see that this criteria for financing is largely referenced, although not stated clearly, from the EIB, European Investment Bank policy. But Europe had over 100 years of natural gas development, whereas in many parts of developing Asia, natural gas is just starting. You know, China had only about 20 years of natural gas development. So I would think that the ADB policy on natural gas financing should not follow the EIB policy, but to continue to encourage natural gas development in this region. So these are the four, I would say, technical comments on the draft paper. So overall, I commend ADB for coming out this very good paper. Many technologies for achieving net zero are available, but none is perfect. Energy policy is a matter of choice and an expression of preferences. It is also a tool to shape the future. So ADB is an international development organization serving the interests of its member states. If this policy is well aligned to member states' collective desire, grounded with developing member countries' realities, and sufficiently forward-looking, I'm sure this policy will be really very good one and will serve ADB and member countries of the region in the coming decades. So last but not least, as a long-term friend of ADB, because I started my ADB consultant work by succeeding Dr. Zhai in 1993, so 28 years ago. So I would suggest that the ADB consider to modernize or revise its logo, because this logo I have seen over almost 30 years now, and many organizations, after having reviewed the mission and the strategy, which ADB has already done by putting forward 2030 mission and strategy with 7 priority areas, I think it's time for ADB to consider making the logo more vibrant and attractive. Thank you.
Thank you, Xavier, for all your comments, suggestions. I've taken due note of the 3 major gaps. I'll not repeat because already taken note, and also the technical point you raised, that these are not details, but important technical issues that reflect the changing nature of the energy sector. That will give us a reflection on how we improve this duly noted. And also your suggestion on modernizing ABB's institutional image. We're doing that. In fact, the logo you have seen is the 2nd generation already. Maybe a 3rd generation need to happen. The first ADB logo is like an airline, airlines picture. But anyway, so we'll see how it modernize. But for the moment, I appreciate your comments. I think these are very, very valid comments, and that's why we need to have this consultation. I will prepare you for the next question, next round. You have talked about innovations, but can you give us some examples of new technologies that I don't know, ADB doesn't know, or the developing member countries don't know, and you can say that these technologies may be available in 5-10 years, and these technologies may be important for you to prepare for it. And you talk about green hydrogen is still 10 years away, but maybe something else you can mention, whatever innovations or business models or in helping us to improve capacity in promoting innovations. And that we would like to hear a bit more from you. So next panelist, my friend, Mr. Ashwini Kumar, who is the founding managing director for Solar Energy Corporation of India. 10 years ago, when every country started its energy business, and there was not much optimism, but Mr. Kumar believed it and created the Solar Energy Corporation of India. India today is a big solar nation. I would like to ask Ashwini Kumar to give us first round of comments, generic comments on the policy you see, you feel whether we are rightly in a good direction, or you, as Xavier mentioned, that you see also some major gaps. Ashwini, please.
Thanks. Good afternoon, Dr. Chai, Mr. Priyanta, Mr. Sakari, and all the panelist colleagues and all participants. First of all, thanks to ADB for giving me opportunity to say something on this. I take this opportunity to congratulate, in fact, ADB for bringing out this very comprehensive document. I have gone through it and I found it's a very comprehensive document. And hats off to you, hats off to ADB for bringing out this document. So, but I would say, because this document is very big, it ticks all the plus points. There can be some issues as spoken by the previous colleague panelist. I share some of them, like the, I mean, it's to me, it's a matter of detailing that how much you would like to detail the technology innovations or innovations per se. It's not technology, it's business models, it's the way you execute the projects and everything. So that's there. So that's, but I think looking at the profile of Asia and Pacific, Asia countries and Pacific, I am trying to put myself in ADB's position and see that you are dealing with various kind of countries, very advanced countries and not so much advanced and so severely affected by the climate changes. So climate has to come in, and that's how I find that alignment of the policy with the Paris goals, all the climate commitments, that's very interesting. And I think that's the call of the day that has to be done. So I see it from that perspective. I think all the guiding principles are very nicely covered, and I support that. My observation is that out of this very big comprehensive policy and looking at the profile of the countries, what do they need? I think whether you call it differentiated policy, for each of the country, or I say that the priorities have to be decided with timelines for each of the countries. And that's very nicely captured by Mr. Sakari, that the first item is that you are helping the countries to firm up their policies along with their national policies and commitments. So I think that has to happen. In fact, that was the first comment, that country-specific national plans have to be made. That has to be helped. Of course, the low-hanging fruit could be the islands. I think there are many islands, solarization of islands can happen, and that's a low-hanging fruit. I am saying because all that economy is diesel-based, and that's a lot of carbon. So I think that should be the high priority areas. Then, of course, it's a natural course that we are scaling up efforts to ramp up solar and wind capacities through demand aggregation like we have done in India, and competitive procurement with private sector participation. So that's the key, competitive procurement. In India, of course, I'll maybe come later, that we did go even for reverse bidding kind of thing. So that's the question we can decide on based on countries. But what I feel that that has to be continued, and we, from the policy point of view, we should target that most of the member countries, we should reach to that level of universal electrification or access, because then we can talk about what are the solutions for example, the cooking. I think in India, we have tried one that we have provided the LPG cylinders to various such families. But again, because the affordability becomes important, they are not refilling it. They are not consuming it. They have kept it for emergency purpose. So that defeats the purpose. And what I believe that in future, if we are able to have uniform access to electricity, then I think electric cooking is going to come. That's one of the solutions, that through induction cookers that we can do. That's very economical, and that can be done. Maybe we need to create the smaller grids for that, or that's a method, and that's a matter of detailing. But another thing which Dr. Jai, I think ADB has been doing earlier, but I think we need to continue that, is how do you de-risk investments into the sector? Because the private participation can be guaranteed only if there is risk minimization. There can be various tools for that. Like, for example, we did in India the solar parks, where you are de-risking from the land and transmission infrastructure point of view the investment. So that's one way of looking at. But I think the most important is we need to help the member countries for bringing out bankable PPAs. It means PPAs which are liked by the countries, which are liked by the developers. That's a kind of thing has to be there, suitable payment security mechanism, because otherwise investment don't come. And if investments are not coming, you don't get the cost competitiveness. So that's a thing. So that's, in my opinion, is very, very significant part. Then of course, the low cost financing, it means we need to create a space for a special money market instruments like the green bonds or sustainable bonds or whatever we say, or tax-free bonds. We need to convince the governments of various countries, you please look into that. That's a beneficial to you in long run. We have been also coining with the idea of whether there can be some kind of insurance for the performance of the projects, because the people have been raising that issues that it's a 25 years PPA, and we don't know how the project is going to perform over this period. And we have been talking in India to various insurance companies, agencies, that why don't you develop a product? And they have been asking that you make it a part of the normal bidding guidelines. Then we are prepared, we can offer some product. And I think, and so that's very important to generate the confidence. Of course, another, I think, priority out of this very comprehensive policy would be the grid infrastructure. And I agree with the previous speakers that RE integration strategies with the storage, even the distribution level, that makes a lot of sense. And in India, we wanted to try, we are thinking of that, for example, in rooftop solar systems, can we help incentivizing consumers, maybe commercial and industrial consumers, for using behind the meter storage systems? So, because distribution companies may not go for a very big storage systems, those kind of policies have to be held, those kind of technology innovations have to be there. And then I think another very key area is the developing niche markets, because otherwise, how do you, scale up? And this could be sustainable agriculture, like the solar pumps you have covered already there. But I think the cold chain, cold storage, that's also important. And that's important from the point of view of increasing the incomes also of the farmers. Then like in India, I know, and maybe in many developing countries, the DG sets are used. Can we have some technology packages which are plug-in play type, which can be used to replace these DG sets? Can we launch programs towards that? Then, of course, public health centers, the educational institutions, green campuses, all these are various areas where we can chip in. One very important thing which I would like ADB to expand is, we are talking about just transition. I know coal power is engraved in social and economic systems, and therefore its full face off would not be possible if we are not able to provide solutions to the persons who are working in it. The people say only reskilling. Reskilling is not good enough. You have to link that with the income avenues. I need to reskill, then I need to connect that maybe industry, cement, steel, or somewhere where these people can go, or some alternative for income generation. So I think that need to be given a lot of push. Otherwise, all these talks will remain there. Then, of course, electrification of transport makes sense only if it is green energy. So it means if we have significant share of green energy into the system, only then the electrification of transport makes sense. Otherwise, it's burning the same energy which we are producing from the thermal. So that's the thing. And another thing, Dr. Chai, I would like to take you back to the time when ADB was helping SECI in setting up a solar thermal power plant. That context has changed, but still in India, as I see, because from the storage perspective, if you see, thermal storage is still a cheaper option. Can there be some scenarios to meet, let us say, evening peak loads by setting up solar thermal power plants? So that's important. I think some pilots need to be done for that. Of course, the for CST kind of technology, thermal technology, hard to abate sector, a lot of heat requirement is there. There, the bioenergy and CST comes into picture that need to be given a focus. These models need to be tried. And I think you have already said the inter-regional connectivity. I would like to propose that maybe ADB can look into that some possible, I would say, corridor where the techno-commercial feasibility can be established for such a thing, and maybe a cooperation with the ISA can be useful. So I'll stop here, and I would like to say again, it's a textbook. Basically, policy document is a textbook. So now you have to derive the action plan based on that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Ashwini, for encouraging us. I recall our discussions in your office and myself with you on CSPs many times, and maybe the context has changed with more innovations. It's time to reconsider all this. I'm very, very much appreciating your suggestion on de-risk investment, and that's important. We may reflect that and many other things you have mentioned, and also very importantly, just transition. I think just transition is a process that would de-risk the transition itself. Otherwise, you may not have support for that. Okay, thank you, Mr. Ashwini. We may not have a time actually for second round, but in case I prepare you that do you see the next generation of government policy in supporting solar PV? Since solar PV already mature, competitive, shall we leave it 100% to market, or there's still some role for government? What's the role of SECI then in the future? Okay, we may not have time because we have only 30 minutes. We have 3 panelists, but I raised questions I've been reflecting. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Sakamoto, Managing Director, IEJ, for sharing his views, and also giving time limits. I would like to request our panelists to be concise and straightforward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tsai. Thank you for inviting me to this virtual consultation roundtable. I would like to join other speakers for commending ADB's efforts to come up with a very important draft energy policy. And I also agree with others that overall, the direction of this draft is in the right direction. I would certainly agree with that. But this document could be even better if you introduce some flexibilities on some aspect. For example, financing conditions for fossil fuels. The reason why I believe so is that the result of our recent analytical work that was conducted jointly with ERIA, Energy Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, headquartered in Jakarta. We evaluated the carbon neutral scenario for each of 10 ASEAN member states. We assume that the Brunei, Singapore will achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, Malaysia, Thailand, 2060, and the rest of the ASEAN member states, 2070. This is a modeling exercise for cost-optimal energy system. We evaluated the renewable potential, taking into full account natural conditions such as sunshine and wind, etc., etc. And the result is, in 2070, power generation of ASEAN, renewable will contribute just 59% of total power supply, as opposed to 90% described by IEA recent roadmap to net zero. The remaining 40%, ammonia and hydrogen will play an important role. And more importantly, for the next 10 years, up to 2030, we would need to install new efficient gas-fired plants. And after that, hydrogen and ammonia will be kicking in, the first for coal-firing, then 100% ammonia and hydrogen power generations. And also at the same time, a gas-fired power plant plus CCS will be also introduced. We also analyze the cost for ASEAN countries. In 2070, average marginal abatement cost will be $718 per CO2 ton. And annual cost will be 4.8% of GDP in 2070. Electricity price will triple compared with the current level. So this is really, really challenging and daunting task. And I would certainly hope ADB will help member states of ASEAN countries in this regard. So back to my basic point, I think given the reality of developing countries, as also mentioned Mr. Xavier Chen, I think you should consider putting some flexibilities on financing fossil fuels. I will stop here, and if I may, I will elaborate in the second round of intervention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sakamoto-san, for being concise and very clear in your message. I took note of the word flexibility, and that's important for us to reflect in the next revision of the policy paper, and also sharing the result of study. Very, very revealing. And sometimes I feel that alarming, because we need to take this into account when we go for transition. Thank you very much. If we have a second round, I would like to ask you about hydrogen, the Japan's vision on hydrogen, how that can be shared with benefit or shared with other countries in Asia and globally. Thank you. Let's go to our colleague from ASEAN Center for Energy, Mr. Zulfikar, Senior Officer, Sustainable Energy, Renewable Energy, and Energy Efficiency, Department of ACE. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Jai, for the chance for the ASEAN Center for Energy to share their views in relation to the ADB energy policy. I am currently bringing the perspective of the Southeast Asia, and I'm thankful for the colleague from IEJ for sharing their net zero studies, especially on the Southeast Asian countries. My first opinion regarding the ADB energy policy review, I would like to join the other colleagues to congratulate the ADB. It has actually quite comprehensive documents. It's covering many aspects related to the energy in the near and the midterm futures. But what I would like to point is that with many activities currently within the policy, ADB energy policy, how will ADB energy policy, energy sector can prioritize their energy projects among all of the sectors. And another point that I would like to point is the ADB is the main mandate is to support the development of the countries. So how this energy policy and financing coming from ADB can support those development, of course, to be in line with the global commitment of SDGs as well as the Paris Agreement. From the Southeast Asian perspective, I also like that there is a notions of the national specific modeling, national specific plan, because for Southeast Asia, as you know, for each country, we have like different conditions, different priorities, different level of economic development. But as a region, I would like to mention that we are united and guided by the APIC, or the ASEAN Plan of Action on Energy Cooperation, which we would like to be in line as well with the ADB energy policy, so that we can optimize the development fund coming from the ADB. And this, another point that I would like to raise, it's very important, is that apparently there are many notions of energy transitions going to the net zero and others. And there are a lot of ambitious targets related to that. But what is important is not how big the target we have, but how to achieve that. And that kind of specific roadmap is currently lacking. And we see that from the IEA new studies on the net zero modeling, if we look at the detail of each milestone, we can see that some of the milestones is probably going to be very difficult to achieve. So to have this something that specific strategies for the countries would be very important, and how the ADB can play its roles in really achieving this step-by-step basis. And so we would like to be very ambitious, but also cautious in having this development. And hopefully that can also be reflected in the ADB energy policy. And another thing that I would like to mention that has been mentioned previously is how this energy policy should be centered in the people. It should be centered in the basics of the socioeconomic needs of the countries. And it's going to be very difficult for countries with huge fossil fuels, not only Indonesia and others, but also China, to really move into 100% renewable, for example. It's not impossible, but it's going to be difficult. And we need to face this reality in a human way, in a socioeconomic way, how to provide incentives to move away from that this coal into new renewable energy. And related to that, I think it will be very important to see this energy transition, how it will bring the change in the structural economy of the countries in the region. The countries that previously depend on fossil fuels, they need to change currently into the forward-looking clean energy technologies. How about the industry? How about the energies? How about the infrastructure and others? And this could be another priority that can be imputed into the ADB energy policy. And probably last, I think I would like to note the importance of the intersectoral discussion. I note that it has been inputted as well in the ADB energy policy. Currently, we are implementing ASEAN Energy and Climate Change Project, and we learned that the energy sector cannot run by itself. It should be connected with transportation, climate, environment, industry, and others. And I think to be able to provide a program or package that can answer more than one sector will be very important. Mentioned in your documents the waste to energy, but also what we want to see is something that more related to the education, to the training, and also to the development of the green business within the country itself. And this is also important to ensure that the energy that will be brought to the region to be sustainable, so that the countries can have this strong ownership of the energy transition. It's not something that brought upon by outside of the region, but something that it's really needed by the region, so they can move by their own motivation. So providing these incentives will be very important. And related to that, I would like to note several specific that might be important. First and the foremost, I think already mentioned, is related to the power grid. And we note that in the case of Vietnam, they have this solar boom, and they increase their solar power capacity in a very fast way. But then there was a question on how to absorb this variable renewable energy to the power grid. So this power grid, ASEAN power grid will be very important to have in the region. I think I will stop by saying that the just energy transition will be very important, and to achieve that, we will need the support from the ADB. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Zulfikar, for your comments. You said you need our support. I would say we also need your support. Different organizations would work together, cooperate, and translating our policies into action. I like very much what you said, people-oriented approach in energy transition and making sure that net zero pathways are specific to our region. We don't have a second round, but I'll just leave a question for reflection that do you think that ASEAN would need to build new coal? Because old coal are there, we know that we go for a process of going forward, but whether it's time already to stop financing any new coal power plant in the region. If we have time, we just have a quick follow-up on that one. But I doubt we have time, but we have only 15 minutes. I have Ms. Maria Pastukova, who is Senior Advisor, Energy Diplomacy, Sustainable Finance, E3G, for a presentation. I assume you have a PPT to share, presentation to share. Maria? Maria, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Jai, distinguished speakers. The presentation is there just to show a couple of graphs so that my arguments are better perceived. Let me, firstly, as all other speakers, congratulate the ADB on the significant progress they made during the review of the energy policy. It is indeed aligned with broadly aligned with the needs for development in the global south and in Asia and the Pacific. These are excerpts from two recent IEA reports. The left one is from the IEA Net Zero, the right one from the report explicitly for financing development of the emerging markets and development economies. And here we see that the key takeaways here are that over 80% of financing needs up to 2030 are really already readily available technologies like renewables, like power transmission grids, And this focus is also repeated in the ADB's energy policy. Innovation is, of course, very important. And I agree with Mr. Chen there, but what we need in the next 10 years is to massively ramp up renewables capacities and the transmission and distribution infrastructure. So their ADB is really aligned with what is needed. The amount of investments needed for the emerging economies, many of them are in Asia and in the Pacific, are massive. The volume has to quadruple by 2030. So this is a real challenge. And given that the focus is on renewables and transmission networks, public finance institutions like the Asian Development Bank will play a key role here. But where do it stand right now? So if we look at the power systems of the recipient countries of the Asian Development Bank, we see that it will be a major transition challenge for countries heavily dependent on coal, such as Mongolia, Kazakhstan, India, or China. But we also see that the role of gas in this transition and decarbonization of the power systems is rather limited, because as you see here, most countries have gas in their system already, or the largest share of the power generation mix is already gas or renewables based. So there is not much space to increase the share of gas in these countries. For some other countries like Mongolia, for example, or Laos, there is no gas in the mix, but also no experience of including gas in the mix and no infrastructure there. So a quick coal to gas switch will just not be feasible economically, because it will mean a massive ramp up of gas infrastructure, of which the approximate economic lifetime is at least 20 to 30 years, which basically means either countries are ending in a carbon lock-in or ending up being with some massive stranded assets if they are going to strive for carbon neutrality by the mid-century or a bit later. So this is the challenge, and here maybe the main focus that the future investment needs to go to. And here ADB is again broadly aligned with these needs, because the focus on transmission and transmission infrastructure has always been there. Focus on the distribution infrastructure has to be even more central, and I agree here with the previous speakers, because that's the only way how we increase the actual electricity access, also in the rural areas. And then we really need to ramp up investments in the modern renewables, particularly in the emerging countries beyond mature markets like China, for example. And here, policy and regulatory reform is key. I will not repeat the previous speakers. I think this point has been made often enough. It is really very, very central. Role of ADB is key for all these developments, because both transmission infrastructure and renewables have very high upfront capital cost. And in most of these countries, the regulatory environment is just not there to attract private investments. So it is really the place where ADB has to step in. And when we look at the new energy policy draft, we already see that the major focus has been shifted to renewables, which have been previously not in the dominant place in the investment portfolio. But further changes are really needed to enable the real shift in finance. Oh, what's happening? Do you see the slide I'm seeing? The slide on gas, yeah?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So it is a real significant step that the ADB is phasing out unabated coal and oil and gas extraction investment. But when we look at the real investment portfolio in the previous years, we already see that there have been practically no investments in these sectors already. So even if these statements are in the policy, they don't mean a real-time investment shift from fossils to renewables, because most of the investments in fossils have been in the gas infrastructure, and they will remain there unless stricter gas screening criteria are applied. It is a very good step that the screening methodology is going to be developed, and we're really looking forward to the details. But there are maybe several points I would like to very quickly line up. First of all, when we're talking about investing in gas, we really have to differentiate between gas for clean cooking, which requires absolutely different amounts of investment, different amounts of infrastructure, and different infrastructure than when we're cooking about large-scale investment in power generation gas infrastructure, such as natural gas and LNG. And clean cooking is indeed very, very important. Then there is a social cost of carbon included in the screening criteria, and we've talked about this. So I will not repeat myself by saying that this has to be adjusted in the new draft, maybe in a bit more detail. But what the most important point I wanted to make is that we're still missing the comprehensive criteria for if gas power infrastructure is to be invested in, how to assess the real carbon lock-in. Because when we say we will take countries' NDC or low carbon development pathways as benchmarks, how do we make sure that this low carbon development pathway do not contribute to a carbon lock-in when investing in the gas infrastructure? How to ensure that they are ambitious enough or that they're transparent enough? So maybe this, including these considerations or thinking about this a bit more, would be important for the next steps. And also, a very important point also made by previous speakers is that all these considerations have to be made in while thinking about the existing regulatory framework in the countries. Because if the regulatory framework in a country already supports fossil fuel more than renewables, then assessing carbon lock-in is just not possible without thinking out of the context, or without thinking what changes have to be made in the policy context so that the carbon lock-in can be addressed sufficiently. And it is also a very positive thing we have saw in the past years that ADB has devoted a lot of money and attention to the policy development and technical assistance. And what we see from this graph, it's from the last evaluation report of the energy sector, is that the countries where ADB has invested most in the policy reform have higher rate of success of the energy projects, such as Indonesia or Pakistan. So institutional reforms are really key to successful implementation of energy projects and to successful ramping up of the renewable facilities. The only problem is this sector, institutional reform, has been rated as less successful than other sectors of the projects. So maybe the main point or the main point of open for development for the energy review would be to try and consider how to make this cooperation with the governments on the policy reform more constructive, how to bring them to listen to the opinions of the regional organizations of the ADB, and how to raise this efficiency of the institutional reform, because this is in the end what really matters for the low carbon development and transition. I will stop here. The ADB has made great success. There's a lot of work to do, but I'm sure you will handle it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria, for offering your comments, and take note of the further issues to be considered by ADB in specific areas that we can reflect and improve the policy, make it more relevant, specific, and clear for our developing countries to follow and to our business operations. Thank you so much for all the comments. This first round is basically the last round. Apologize for the audience who asked a lot of questions. And also I've raised questions to panelists for the second round, but we don't have time. But within the next 5 minutes, I actually come back to my first question I asked to Hongpeng. Because I'm supposed to do a summary and closing remarks. When you do a summary, when you see views are common but different, so how do you reconcile these issues? And I would like to learn from United Nations how, in such cases, even among the panelists, you see subtle differences, right? So how do we go for best approach in best practice in preparing relevant policy document, considering different position of a member state? Hongpeng, you have the floor for closing remark instead of me.
Thank you, Yongbing. I think this is a very difficult question. Like ADB and also like UN, we are the intergovernmental agency. So all the decisions, all the policies will come from a consensus. And also most importantly is member country driven. So I really think we need to address the needs of the member countries. Of course, there are different development stage, different situation and challenges in different countries. As previous speakers also mentioned, there are a lot of countries, they probably it's meet a lot of challenges, which for some other countries, it may not be a challenge. But I really think one thing is to enhance the regional cooperation. So let the countries lead for this kind of energy policy development and provide their input and provide, make them have the ownership. I think that's most important. And also get the consensus. Of course, maybe the final result is not perfect, but at least it's reached the consensus, meet all the most of the countries' expectations, and then to have the one target. That means you provide energy to everyone and to meet the needs of those groups. I really think that's most important. You really need consultations, and I think it's already reached to the last stage. You probably need to get all these countries and to agree on this through further consultation. I really think it's already a very good document and need a kind of final approval. That's probably the most important part. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
And thank you, Hongpeng, for sharing your experience. I think basic issue I understand is to continue to listen, to talk to countries and get their views and see how we remain. The purpose of our energy policy is to be effective and relevant to Asia, and not just Asia globally, but to every country in Asia. So I think a differentiated approach may be needed. And a lot of comments I've received today from different expert panelists. I apologize, so I don't have time to go through rarely a second round, but the questions I've asked also imply that those are the questions we have been thinking, how that we'll get this advice from through the consultations. So the consultation will continue beyond this session. We have a website open for the public, and we continue to receive contributions through the website. Our staff will find a way to share the link so that the questions that have not been answered, we try to incorporate through the system. Even the question that has been posted, we take note and reflect into our consideration, so that we do have a policy paper. We hope that the energy policy can be adopted in October this year. That is just a few weeks ahead of COP26. And that's the time for all nations to sit down, I hope face-to-face, to sit down and find a high level of consensus to push this energy transition. If we have a high level consensus, at that level, we'll have much less issue in coming up a policy that is relevant to our country. So I hope that this COP26 will be a successful one, but I know prior to COP26, there are major events also organized by United Nations. There are some other events as well. ADB will be part of this event and continue to interact and get advice and continue to consult all stakeholders. With that, I would like to close the conversation. I would just like to check if my chairman, Mr. Priyanka, has advice to share, or Ms. Shannon, you have something to say before we close it. We have 30 seconds. Mr. Priyanka?
Thank you, Yongping. I think I don't have anything else to add. Actually, it has been a great discussion, and we could see varying views, and particularly from the developing member nations, and which we have not heard that much in the past. So I think that's going to be a great discussion, and we will incorporate this, as you quite rightly said, in our final version. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shannon.
Sure, Yongping. Similar to Priyantha, I just would like to say thank you to all of the distinguished panelists for sharing their views. It's really important for us to hear this feedback as well as this encouragement. And I can assure you that we were all taking copious notes and really value these inputs and look forward to reflecting an evolved version of the draft in the coming weeks. So thank you very much from my side as well.
Thank you, Shanna, as one of the main key contributor to this policy with the guidance of Priyantha. Of course, all of us will be part of that process. Thank you all. And this is the end of this consultation session. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.